Today we're talking about classical education, and I want to introduce you to the concept of the trivium and the quadrivium, two big scary words which we'll break down and make them easy for you, because this is the education that your child can experience. The trivium is simply a Latin word that means the three ways, and the quadrivium is simply a Latin word that means the four ways, and it was the way the ancients spoke of knowledge and how they aggregated it in an encyclopedic fashion. The trivium simply consists of the three modes of education: grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric, and the quadrivium contemplates four disciplines that break into two different categories: issues of multitude and issues of magnitude. On the side of multitude, we include mathematics, which is the discussion of absolute quantity. It also includes music, which is the science of relative quantity. And then on the magnitude side, the ancients thought of geometry as being something microspatial that you could work out on a slate. But when you looked above your head at night into the starry sky and looked at the kinds of forms that existed there, the science of astronomy was born, which is macrospatial. There is a kind of rhyme and reason to the way the ancients organized their knowledge, but together, the idea of grammar, dialectic, rhetoric, mathematics, music, geometry, and astronomy, the basic categories of human knowledge together form or coalesce into what we now know as the 7 liberal arts. And perhaps you attended a liberal arts school. This is where it was born. It was born in the church. It was the church who took the idea of a unified world with all of its diversity of study and possible knowledge, combined it together into the university. And the university was not just for technical training. In fact, the university was to create and develop the human being. It was educational versus professional training. But what are the 3 ways? The 3 ways simply begin with the trivium: grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric. These are not subjects per se. These should be understood rather as modes of knowledge. They do have content, of course, but they really speak as much to how we teach or the method by which we are dealing with subjects. So, for example, we could apply the trivium to the art of cooking. Let's use that as an analogy. We could say that there is a grammar of cooking, a dialectic of cooking, and a rhetoric of cooking. They represent 3 ways of getting at the art of cooking. In the grammar mode, we would acquaint ourselves with the tools at hand. We would want to know about pots and pans, and we would want to know the difference between a bundt pan and a saucepan. We would have to know the basics of the kinds of things that we were cooking, whether it were vegetables or the world of cheese, or whether it was the world of meats and poultry. If we took our example further and talked about the dialectic of cooking, we would be less concerned about pots and pans and the basic vegetables on the countertop, but we would be more interested in what goes with what. So if I did a little thought experiment here and asked you to just quickly answer, what would we drink with pizza? You might immediately say Coke, because that's what goes with pizza. What if I were to say peanut butter and everyone would say jelly, of course. There's any number of things that seem to naturally go together, and when we answer the question why do these things go together on the human palate, that's not a grammatical question, it's a dialectical question. It's a question that tells us why something is, not just what it is. And of course, if we were to talk about the rhetoric of cooking, that would be something like what's showing on your screen. If I invited you to my house for dinner, you wouldn't be very interested in my pots and pans, but you would be interested in looking at what I'm presenting. And what I'm showing to you on the table, I would make it as beautiful and as compelling as I possibly could. So in our example here, we can say that every discipline in the classroom has its own grammar, it has its own dialectic, and it has its own rhetoric. Let's talk for a moment about the grammar mode, maybe just the facts. Well, it's not just the facts, but it does start with facts. Little children who cannot read have to learn words, and without words we can't think. We have to have words to think with. So we start teaching them right away to learn. And we're familiar with English grammar. But every discipline, remember, has its own kind of grammar. History has a grammar. Mathematics has a grammar. Grammar which, if not mastered, prevents us from moving to the next level of understanding. And so the grammar mode not only implies content that we're learning, but it also implies a way of teaching, taking advantage of the student's natural ability to absorb vast amounts of information, some of which may not really register as real knowledge that is understood, but nonetheless lays the foundation for the next thing that the student is going to do. In the dialectic mode, we answer the question not what, but the question of why. Dorothy Sayers said, "Children of that age are intolerable anyhow, and that their natural argumentativeness may just as well be channeled to good purpose as allowed to run away into the sand." The dialectic mode takes advantage of a middle schooler's natural argumentativeness and contrariness. We teach students, yes, to argue, but we want them to argue well, and that's for the purpose of thinking for themselves. At this mode, we seek to develop the faculties of analysis and clear thinking, the willingness to ask why and to ask how. These are not questions that we run away from. These are questions that we want students who are in our care to freely ask. I want all of my students to ask the hard questions. Is there a God? Why is Jesus Christ the Savior of the world? Why is math so hard? These are questions that we want the opportunity to discuss with students long before they ever enter university or some other phase of their life where there may be someone else not so friendly, perhaps to their faith or to their values, who will answer the question for them. And so when a student learns to think for himself and understands that there are actually laws of thought that govern how everyone thinks, they're able to better understand themselves, and they're better able to understand what it is the material is saying in front of them. So when we move from the grammar, the dialectic, and finally into the mode of rhetoric, we're moving into a zone where the students are much more developed and able to not just know what it is that they're talking about or why, but now we want them to be able to express it in a winsome and compelling way. So the goal of the School of Rhetoric is to teach a student how to express himself with clear-minded thinking. Now, all students at all times are using grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric. Even little children who are working grammatically are also reasoning through things, and they're also expressing themselves. But as a child gets older, the rhetoric mode of education begins to dominate. But it depends upon the skills of grammar and dialectic. In other words, these are not stages that we simply move through and we're finished with. A student who is developing an essay needs to understand how to get the facts. He needs to understand how to interpret and understand the facts. But in the rhetoric mode, he needs to understand how to express the facts. And that, for us, is reading and writing. Clear-minded expression is what we're after, and writing and reading are modes of understanding. They're ways of getting at knowledge. And so we read together in community, and we spend a significant amount of our classroom time writing together individually and sharing our work. And the idea of bringing a student to confidence and self-expression so that at the end of his New Covenant career, he can stand up having written a significant paper in his senior year, present that to his peers, and then take questions and defend that from his faculty advisors. This is a great gift that prepares students, in some ways over-prepares a student for the university or for the next level of education that he may pursue. And so at New Covenant, we teach a student not just what to know, but we teach them how to think. We teach them not just how to take a test, but how to actually learn. We teach them not only what is good and true, but also what is beautiful. So we're shaping their desires so that they know what to love. And then, of course, we're not just teaching them how to make a living, we're teaching them how to live. And we do this through the modes of a classical tradition, grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric. The trivium together with the quadrivium, the liberal arts, writ very small for young people.